Good morning, everybody. Kia ora. Kia ora, everybody. Welcome to the Strengthening Communities Hui Friday Day. Look at all your fantastic faces. Hi, Reese, haven't seen you for a while. So, tēnā koutou katoa, everybody. We're just letting the last few people come in from the waiting room. It's a really busy morning this morning. I'll introduce myself very quickly. I'm Liana Stuckles. Some of you may know me, but we'll talk more about that later. We've got some great keynote speakers lined up this morning, and because in particular, our first keynote speaker is on a very tight time pressure this morning, we're going to forgo some of the preliminaries and go straight into karakia. So everybody sort of settle themselves in. We've got such a cool day coming up today, but I also appreciate it's a Friday and some of us have been on Zoom for a long time. So we're going to do our best to keep you engaged and happy. And we might even do some wriggling and things like that to make sure that our bodies are happy as well. So if we could move over to the karakia slide. There's a great team all behind here helping it all work. Of course, something will go wrong at some point. But let's just center ourselves. And I know many of you are all on mute at the moment, but this is a beautiful karakia. And just to bring yourself into the room, why don't we all say this out loud, even if it's to the cat? So, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana. Hei haura hi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Hui e, taiki e. Fantastic. So welcome everybody. We're just setting up to make sure that our first speaker is here. I'll just say a few words by introduction and then explain that because James Shaw has really got to leave on the dot of 9, we are asking for questions for James in the chat, and we also have some questions that have been sent in beforehand that went out with the invitation. So we apologise if we won't have a big long time for a back and forth with James, but reassured we are going to have a discussion about what he says later on in this session. I'm just going to check in with the team here. Has James entered the room?
Yes, we're good to go.
Excellent. So without further ado, you will see that here I am as MC and I've got my favourite Susie Wiles poster behind me. And this morning I was thinking, oh yes, I'm going to say tēnā koutou katoa and welcome to everybody across the motu. And I suddenly thought, oh, we sound like the morning daily briefing for COVID. And then I thought, but that's exactly what we need. We need the morning daily briefing for climate change. And ladies and gentlemen, we've got the two speakers that I think are absolutely the right people to tell us about the pulse of what's going on around climate change in Aotearoa at the moment. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce to you someone who is, of course, we know as co-leader of the Green Party. Someone who has more recently also become Associate Minister for the Environment with responsibility for biodiversity. So a great link for much of our work there as well. But most importantly today, here with us is the Minister of Climate Change. So ladies, gentlemen, and all others who are welcome, including your cats and dogs, I give you the Honourable James Shaw.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Good morning, and thank you for that very warm introduction, Liana. I am sorry I'm a bit late. I have a number of different things going on this morning and just completely got my diary wrong in my head. So look, I recognise we don't have a huge amount of time, and I think that we always get far more value out of these when we get into the conversation between you and I. So I'll try and keep my kind of opening remarks brief so that we can focus on the things that you think are important. I just wanted to say it's really lovely to see you. so many people I know are on this call, and it is really lovely to have a chance to catch up with you. And I just want to thank you very much for all of the very good and the very hard work that you do. And I think it is a very exciting time right now for a lot of reasons in terms of climate change and biodiversity, and the links between those two things as well. I know a lot of the news that we see is grim, and we've not had a great week having to kick out the emissions reduction plan, which is our response to the Climate Change Commission's recommendations. But unfortunately, with a third of the country still at level 4 lockdown, we just couldn't go and have those kind of public conversations that we needed to. And then the cascade effect of that means that we just couldn't meet our statutory deadline. The silver lining to that piece of news, however, is that it does mean that Cabinet's now made a decision to align the emissions reduction plan with the budget next year. We were in this sort of slightly weird situation of having to issue the emissions reduction plan in December and then kind of reissue it again after the budget in May next year, once we had clarity around funding decisions. So because the slippage in time due to the Delta outbreak means that we're having to go early next year anyway, we said, well, actually, let's just bring those two things together. And that gives us a bit more leverage in terms of what the budget looks like. So that's, I guess, good news in one sense, although it is a real shame that we don't have that plan out. Having said that, you'll get quite a good sense of the kinds of things that we are planning when we release the discussion document, which is in early October, fingers crossed, assuming that Auckland is out of lockdown by then. And that's because it'll contain the emissions budgets that we're responding to, and also our kind of policy responses to the Climate Change Commission's recommendations. And those do touch on a number of areas that you and your organisations have a very direct interest in. So I noticed in the chat, somebody just mentioned zero waste. The targets around waste and what we're doing there are eye-wateringly ambitious, which is great to have that level of ambition. In fact, it's given the public servants a case of heartburn because they're sort of having to commit to something that they're actually not entirely sure is possible. And I actually really like to see organisations be stretched and make commitments to something that they're actually not 100% sure about how they're going to meet, because that's where you get creativity, that's where you get innovation, and that's what forces our agencies to actually start working in partnership with organisations like your own to say, well, actually, we don't have all of the answers. If we are going to cut waste emissions by 70% in 10 years, how are we going to do that? So this is why I say I think it is actually quite an exciting time. There are, of course, for those of you in the community energy space, there's some very significant work that has to go on there. We know that we need something like 70% more electricity generated over the course of the next 30 years, much of which has to be built in the next 10 years. And that's a combination of utility scale electricity for the grid, but also a massive increase in distributed small scale community and sort of household and business level generation, on-site generation as well. And we need that system to be kind of working. So there's a lot of work there for central government to make sure that the actual energy market's working properly to facilitate that. But huge opportunity. And I think finally our time has come when it comes to the kinds of work that you're doing there. And then, of course, nature-based solution, what we call nature-based solutions, which is a phrase I actually loathe, but kind of is what it says, which is, can we work much more effectively using nature as, part of the solution to our mitigation challenge, reducing our net emissions, but also our adaptation challenge. So how can we use what I tried to be described as natural infrastructure to support things like flood defences and things like that, rather than always using hard infrastructure all the time. And with the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity eventually coming out, what are the kind of opportunities there to bring the work that we're trying to do in lifting our standards around protecting and restoring our native taonga to, how we get ourselves through the climate challenge, and then how do we work particularly with iwi Māori and with private landowners and farmers and so on to do that in a way that's actually mutually rewarding for everybody, rather than the kind of frustrating environment that we've had for a lot of people in the past. So that's that. I know I'm sort of sounding quite Pollyannish about it this morning, but I sort of feel like we're at that kind of cusp that at the moment where the hard work is getting the flywheel turning, and then once it starts to turn, it generates a momentum of its own. The really hard part is getting started, and I think Aotearoa has taken a very long time to kind of get started, but it feels like that wheel is now starting to turn. And of course, you and your organisations are going to be a big part of that. So I'll stop there and turn it over now to you to ask questions about the kinds of things that you're interested in.
Ngā mihi nui, James. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for the opportunity to engage in some kōrero. Look, I'm just going to, be my usual self and cut straight to the chase. The aim of us for this day is for us to talk about what bold action we could take. But I do really like that phrase, eye-wateringly ambitious. I think we might nick that one off you. That's, I think, what we want to discuss today. But the other thing that I haven't heard you mention, I guess, is really about just transition, equity, and where our treaty partners will be in this. I mean, that's certainly something that we know we want to emphasise, and we want to see where the centre of gravity and the leadership is around that. So, for you, what do you think is crucial in terms of a just transition?
Yeah, look, I want to talk about a just transition and an equitable transition and partnership with the iwi Māori. They're related, but they're also distinct. I have to say, I think the Climate Change Commission did a really good job, in particular in relation to the directness with which they told government we've got to do a much better job of working in partnership with iwi Māori. Not as a sort of an isolated thing on the side, like, here's just another work program, but integrated right across all of the other work. So when you look at the chapters on waste, on energy, on transport and agriculture and so on, the very clear direction from the Commission is that in each of those, we need to have a distinct partnership approach with iwi Māori. And so I think that you will see that starting to come through. I have to say that is not an area of strong government competence or capability. So I'm under no illusions that we're going to get it right the first time. But that's what I was hinting at before, where I was saying that's where it forces government agencies to actually start working in partnership with community organisations, including a number of the ones that are represented here, in order to kind of build that network.
Yeah, sorry, carry on, James.
Sorry, I'll just say something around the just transitions and equitable transitions, and we do use that language interchangeably, although just transitions is a very specific process which has been union-led. So that's why the Commission refers to an equitable transition, because it wanted to both include that, but also think broadly. Again, I think my request for the organisations that are part of this network would be, when we do come out with the discussion document in a few weeks' time, there are gaps in it, and that's really, we've got a very clear request here to say, we don't have all of the answers. what can you do to inform central government about how we can kind of structure this? Because I really want this to be not just a plan for the government, although it's clearly government-led, but a plan for the whole country, and that includes unions, businesses, community organisations, iwi organisations, and so on. And I think some of our agencies have thought through the distributional impacts and what we might do to ensure just transitions, and other agencies haven't. They just haven't had the in-house capability. So I think that's where the kind of expertise that you have can really make a difference.
Thank you, James. And look, I am going to take the opportunity to do a little bit of trying to link together some of those things. So in some respects, one angle potentially of thinking about the iwi relationship, of course, is at a much more local level around mana whenua. And that means, of course, that it does take it back to those on the ground flax roots relationships in place. And although these three networks that are on this call would say that we are still at the beginning of the journey of developing those partnerships strongly ourselves, surely that's got to be where the links in place are going to be such a strength. And I think that's where there's at least two questions on the chat. I think one from Reese, one from Scott Willis, around, look, we're going to call your bluff about linking the process now to the budget. One of the advisors that we've had on a week of run-up hui to get some outside ideas on this was that what we really need is like a shed out the back where we can tinker on solutions and start to really accelerate bottom-up community-led innovation and activation. And we would love to be the catalyst at the centre of that, working in partnership across all the rohe. But that needs a fund. That needs a fund that is not going to be like the normal funds where we've got 20 zillion outputs that we have to say we're definitely going to deliver. We need to be able to innovate fast and adaptively. And I guess I'm just going to say it, whether everyone else does. Why isn't that in the discussion document? Where on earth is the investment in the social sector that doesn't have all the usual strings attached? I guarantee you we can go faster than your civil servants.
I guarantee that too. I mean, the fact that it's taken us 4 years to get started, I think demonstrates that. Look, there is a specific recommendation in the Commission's report. Recommendation 10 talks about ensuring, and it kind of uses very public language speak. It says, ensure an inclusive and effective consultation, engagement, and public participation. And I think that the thinking in relation to that recommendation is undercooked. And I think that is an area where you might want to focus your energies.
Okay, we're going to take that hint because, of course, yes, participation.
Lovely made, I know.
Participation, engagement, they're still way down that end of the spectrum where there's a centre that sort of tells us what to do and we respond. Whereas I think we need leadership from every sector, right?
Yeah, we do. And I've got a sort of a strategy map for the transition, and it has a number of sections in it. And I think most people get very focused on the section which is about each of the sectors' transitions, so waste, energy, transport, agriculture, etc. But actually, some of the other sections are equally, if not more important. And one of them is around kind of supporting and enabling leadership right across Aotearoa. And so it talks about that recommendation that I just mentioned, but also aligning central and local government efforts. And we often forget that local government exists, and we've got not the best orientation towards local government here, partnering with iwi Māori, trying to, continue to work for, cross-partisan kind of buy-in and so on. And also within government, to try and make sure that it's not just Ministry for the Environment, but actually you've got all of government response. So that section is actually really important, because if we don't get that right, then none of the other stuff is possible.
So I'm just going to whack in a few questions from the chat. There's one here particularly about asking the 4 big gentailers to be able to work directly with community energy partners. I mean, there's many people on this call that have been slaving away at that particular coalface, to use a bad analogy, for a long time. Where is that gentle persuasion from government going to come so that we can get to meet in the middle on this one?
Yeah, I mean, as with all energy policy, it's located at MB, at the energy team, and, you know, with Megan Woods, who is the Minister for Energy. And I think that, I mean, she is, you know, a strong ally within government in terms of strong climate action, but also, you know, has a pretty heavy portfolio mix, and, you know, her lead energy is trying to solve the housing crisis. And so the pace of reform in the energy sector is kind of slow. So I would just say, again, you know, with the submissions, keep the pressure on to say, you know, you said that there would be a sustainable energy strategy, you know, where is it as part of this plan, and where are those links and those relationships?
And I'm going to take that one from another question that came in earlier, James, which is, you know, we are getting serious about how the influence of this very broad network across many sectors could be brought to bear in a constructive, or perhaps, you know, basically get over the inertia. You know, we're in this very sort of risk-based inertia about, oh, we have to weigh this up and weigh that up. So I think that's why we're glad to hear that we're in the eye-wateringly sort of zone, because that's it. We can't proceed guaranteeing that all the answers will be right. So if we were, what is some tips or some essential things that you think we need to be engaging in when it comes to that wider influence? I guess I'm thinking about government at the national level, but of course also crucially our regional and local councils.
Yeah, look, I think there is a massive risk aversion in government, and you know, at both the local authority level and in particular in central government. And I think, I mean, that's for a lot of reasons that are well outside of my control. But I think part of the issue is that, you know, people don't necessarily know what's possible. And so I see kind of part of my job, or part of our job, is to be able to find those examples of where breakthrough solutions are starting to happen, and to kind of go, look, see, you know, if we were just to scale this up, that would get us, you know, not all the way, but at least a more part of the way.
So we need to really like get those solutions, even if they are sort of fresh out of the shed, to be able to put the spotlight on them. Look, I've got a couple of questions here around waste, because there are some waste people on the call. I'm going to put two together. One is, obviously many of us have been shocked to see that there's another sort of incineration proposal coming up down south, and we thought we'd fought that many times over already, and have difficulty understanding why that would be on the table at the same time that we're trying to do something around climate change. And so that's one angle on waste. And the other one is around, most of the focus at the moment seems to be on organic waste, whereas again, we're working across all the waste streams, and we think there's quite a lot of, I wouldn't call it low-hanging fruit, but fruit nevertheless to be gained from not just having a sort of a myopic focus only on organic waste. And, you know, we can't afford to just have the low-hanging fruit. We need all the fruit. Everything that we can do needs to be done. So we're wondering why we don't have a broader approach to emissions reductions across all of the waste streams.
Well, I think, yeah, I think we do. I mean, there is obviously a significant focus on organic waste because of the biogenic methane component of it. But the draft of the waste strategy that's kind of in circulation at the moment, really, I mean, it does sort of start with the principle of a circular economy, right? So it actually sort of starts with the idea that you try and eliminate waste at source, first of all, so that no matter what waste stream you're talking about, there's just less of it. And then that you know, like all the stuff that you already know, that you try and reuse and so on before you get into recycling and reprocessing, before you get into ultimate disposal. And so I think that's a very long way away from the, you know, history that we've had in New Zealand, which is that we either chuck it in a hole in the ground or send it to China. And so I'm feeling quite good about where that is at. Yeah. When it comes to the incineration plant, well, I mean, I think like anything, it'll have to demonstrate that it can do it at 0 or low emissions. And if it's got an emissions profile, then it's going to have to work out how it deals with those within our emissions cap. I mean, that's kind of as straightforward as anything.
Look, we've got 4 minutes, so I'm just going to give one other question that came in, which is that, I know we've all been through this, but it's that every now and then it really hits you, doesn't it? Like scrolling through my Facebook feed, there was the stuff that was released yesterday from the Climate Action Tracker. And I can't remember the exact words, but New Zealand was down there in terms of our responses. I think it was like woefully inadequate. That wasn't the exact word, but that was the, and then someone had put in the comments, well, not just looking at New Zealand, but looking at all of the countries, and there's only one, the Gambia, that's actually on track to meet its Paris commitments. And they basically said, well, that's it, we're beep.
Yeah.
And then you get that new wave of grief, don't you? You get that new kind of like, oh my God, I'd actually not thought about that for a week or two. And, again, I think, particularly if we're taking a more Te Ao Māori and Aotearoa based perspective, our hearts and souls have got to be in this. Like, we've got to find a way to deal with that grief and to do it person to person, to find the hope, to keep hold of the kaupapa and the values that we hold. And I mean, again, I think that's why the grassroots, and we think that's why the grassroots approach is the way where you can genuinely do that in community. But I don't know where you're at on that, James. Like,
there's a lot of territory there, so first of all, my sister-in-law is one of the country's chief psychiatrists, so I lean on her quite a lot, and she's also the president of the New Zealand Association of Psychiatry, and they are dealing with climate grief as an emerging phenomena. And one of the things that she says helps with that is a sense of personal agency, the idea that I can do something, even if it's small, that makes a difference. And certainly, when I travel, that's one of the questions that people are constantly asking is, great, cool, but what do I do? What can I do? And so I agree with you. Grassroots action, even on the stuff that just, kind of sometimes as simple as planting trees, actually helps to really get people engaged in that. And individual action needs to be facilitated at the kind of communal level. And so that is where central and local government, I think, have a really significant role to play to both facilitate that, but to demonstrate ways in which some of the things that have to happen can only happen at a governmental level. And those need to happen also in order for people to have a sense of hope. And also, central and local government has a role to play in facilitating action at the individual level, at the whānau level, at the community level, at the level of individual businesses, and so on. And so I think that is where you've got to take a sort of an all levels approach to change. And again, that's why I think that set of recommendations around facilitating leadership right across the country is an area where I would like to have more input on, because I think that the thinking in central government so far is very thin when it comes to that dimension.
Oh, look, again, ngā mihi nui, James, and you'll see that there's 100 people or more on this call. It was basically booked out. That hopefully you've seen their faces and we've seen yours. We looked at each other in the virtual eye anyway. And I'd just like to thank you so much for your time. I know you've got a really busy day. Everybody just give James a big, for those of you who can see, put your hands up, give him the virtual chat, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, well, and thank you for all of yours and for your ongoing hard work, much of it on the smell of an oily rag. That's obviously organic oil. I do hope that we can, continue the dialogue here. I'm going to ask you a favour before I sign off, which is, can you collect all of the questions that are in your chat? Just do a copy and flip them through. And what I'll do is I'll ask the team to kind of develop individual responses and flick it back over the course of the next week or so.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will definitely do that. And thank you everybody on the call for your patience for my rather inadequate scanning through, talking, clicking at the same time. You know, we'll all get better at this. But I think we did actually cover, now I've had time to look, most of the topics. So well done, all of us. Thank you, James. Okay, so everybody just take a little, bring your shoulders up to your ears and take a big breath in and just go, say hello to your bums so that they're not just sitting all the time. And I'm going to move on to our next speaker because I'm really going to try and make sure we don't overrun today. In fact, I'm going to move on to the speaker before I even do much of the blurred bloody blah about the ongoing things for today and ways of working, etc. Let's just really make the most of the people that have come to this call. So I have great pleasure in being able to introduce our next speaker. Many of you will have seen her. She seems to have many part-time hats on. And what I personally have really benefited from her work, she works across all of Indigenous, environmental and human rights. And she's the kind of person who doesn't just say, you know what, colonialism's a bitch or a bastard. She goes into the detail, and through reading her blogs, my ignorance has been woken up time and time again. It is thanks to her that I've even heard of things like the doctrine of discovery. It's thanks to her that I've learned about the destruction that were happening in her rohe and all the forests and Ngāti Portal's rohe. Everything about this woman is kind and generous, and at the same time focused and laser-like on the detail and well-argued arguments. And so I'm sure she will mihi to you and introduce herself as well, but I'd love to welcome Tina Ngata to our call.
Tēnā koe. Kia ora. Thank you, Liana. Very kind introduction, and tēnā koutou. E ngā hoa tiriti, kua whakarawika mai nei. Ko tēnā ngata tōko ingoa, hauri nā te tai rāwhiti, nā hikurangi maunga, nā waiapu awa, nā Ngāti Porou iwi. Thank you very much for the invite to come and spend some time. That was interesting. I really also just want to take a moment to, first of all, you know, mihi to you all for the invite to come and speak with you today, but also to those who have been putting those questions up on the chat, really high quality questions and things that were burning in my heart as I listened to James speak as well. And I'm going to speak a little bit to some of those themes as well. So for those who I have not yet met, I live and work in the East Cape of Te Ika Maui. I'm Ngāti Porou. I work in the field of environmental research and planning. I do planning for my hapu around our coastal areas and our marine food systems, and I also do forest regeneration planning. And I hold a few different hats that relate to Indigenous rights and Indigenous environmental rights. And that's brought me into some interesting spaces. I am here also today wearing the hat of being a member of the Parakore whānau. So I've been a member and been a part of the Parakore organisation now since 2013. And it's a kaupapa very close to my heart for a long time. We've been working with communities around Aotearoa, and I guess it's that issue of relationships that I want to speak to about today, because if there is one kind of core unavoidable truth that I've learned in my years of dealing with these seemingly complex challenges of climate change and plastic pollution, it's that it all really does boil down to relationships. The centralizing and rechanneling forces of imperialism that surround us in our world have divorced decision makers from the impacts of their decisions. And that's led to huge disproportionate burdens upon the global south for the profits, and even for many actually of the green solutions of the global north. And the seductive forces of privilege and profit and power have divorced human minds from their own sense of humanity. And consequently, we see industries and corporations making very calculated judgments on human rights in the form of lost revenue and cost to public image. And in a very physical sense, people are being displaced every day by forces related to climate change. This is ironic because I'm actually speaking to you from a hotel because of a flooding that's happening where I live, and the bank behind my house has burst. And so I'm hoping my house is still there when I get home in a few days once the storm has passed, and we are completely flooded up the East Coast, and we're getting increasing levels of these severe storm events. And for these very rurally isolated communities that are most often out of sight, out of mind, without any infrastructural support, we really are on the front lines and at the coalface of climate change now. It is not an abstract future. It's something that's impacting us right now. And we also know that there are people being displaced through climate-related conflict, through rising seas, through melting landscapes, through broken food systems that are polluted by micro and macro plastics. And we also know who those communities are. They are largely communities of colour. They are largely Indigenous communities. They are migrant communities who are still being disproportionately impacted even after they are displaced. And so, like I said, it's not an abstract future. In fact, by 2017, 70 million people had already been displaced through climate-related issues. And according to the Global Water Institute, within 9 years from now, some 700 million people globally will be displaced through water scarcity. And some of that displacement is also directly related to apparently renewable hydro energy sector. And so, like all climate crises, Aotearoa is not an exception. And even if we come back to this issue of climate-related water scarcity, these aren't issues that we can close our borders to. They are deeply complex like COVID, but they can't be managed by closing our borders. The East Cape here, where I live, it's projected to become increasingly dry by 2050. And that's an experience that's going to be broken by extreme storm events, the likes of which we're going through as I speak, that will devastate ecologies and create flooding and social emergencies as well. But we also know that there are over 100 landfill sites right now around Aotearoa that are teetering on collapse into river systems and coastlines, and that the increased climate-driven severe storm events is what's likely going to send them over the edge. We know that landfill waste emissions contribute to the problem, but that's just one part of a much larger issue that rests within supply chains as a whole. And we know that plastic pollution and acidification work together to inhibit the ability of ocean systems to carry out their climate functions. And so these are all things that we're very aware of at a community level even. And around the country, there are increasingly communities who are aware of those connections and ready to be involved in the solutions. And when we talk about these solutions as well, it's become quite easy for us to utilize the anonymous, nameless, faceless term climate change as the causing factor. It's kind of like the war on terror. It gives us no one person to point the finger at, and it allows kind of dominant actors and their factors to hide in obscurity and to even claim beneficence at times. And it sets the starting point of the problem at its manifestation stage. But we know the core problem is broken relationships. The Indigenous communities that have held the front line of protecting our planet's remaining resources since before the climate movement even began, the Indigenous groups who heralded the problem, who warned the world that it was coming, and have been calling out to be heard. They're all aware that these multiple experiences and apparently complex issues are manifestations of a core problem of broken relationships to each other and broken relationships to the world around us, broken relationships to the impacts of our decisions. We warned about where this type of decision making would lead even 500 years ago and 250 years ago. We warned about it 50 years ago. We're still warning about it now. And the world is overarchingly too slow and too self-interested to listen to that warning. So I'm really happy for us to be here today and these types of forums where we can and do listen to each other. And at the same time, we can't be all doom and gloom. We know that Indigenous communities also, when they're operating at their fullest potential, hold incredible solutions to these challenges. We know that Indigenous managed forest systems have resulted in extraordinary levels of carbon sequestration. They've sunk at least 33 times the global emissions of carbon per year. We know that Indigenous territories hold vast swathes of the world's remaining biodiversity and carry out incredible functions for climate change and remediation. We know that Indigenous communities have deliberate exemplary models for thinking communally, and that's helped us in the face of COVID. And we know how to manage and mend relationships. We know how to integrate approaches to sustainability right across our lived experiences. And I saw that Michael Tavares earlier made a really strong point about integrating the principles of zero waste across our social fabric. So Parakore is another example in that sphere of what I'm talking about, of Indigenous brilliance and success of Indigenous approaches in the face of apparently complex challenges. As an Indigenous organisation since 2011, it has laser focused on relationships within communities in order to clear the pathway for marae, for associated communities and Māori, and even now non-Māori organisations to consider what zero waste means in light of their distinct reality and in light of being distinctly from Aotearoa. It has used Indigenous models and frameworks to ground our response to waste and pollution in our way, and it's gone further to respond to regional and even hapu and marae level distinctiveness. Now, I heard James mention, I'm going to start talking really fast because I know I'm taking a lot of time, sorry. But I heard James mention around, there's leadership from government, but, my experience is that grassroots movements, that the actual action doesn't happen with post-settlement governance entities. No offense, my iwi whānau, they do some fantastic work, but they are also inhibited by progress paralysis. And it's a lot to place all of the burden on our iwi runanga when they are also trying to find housing, trying to manage fisheries, trying to manage all of these things. There are flax, roots, marae and hapu based communities who are ready, willing, able and very effective in that space that we can work better with, especially government can work better with. And so, from a Parakore perspective, working in that space has resulted in 476 to date marae communities and their associated organisations. And as I said, some non-Māori organisations as well. 476 of them across Aotearoa are part of the Parakore journey towards zero waste. And as a collective community, we've diverted nearly 560 tonnes of waste from landfill, and we've delivered zero waste education to over 416,000 participants now. And these are the types of outcomes that have earned Parakore International environmental awards, but really it's our indigeneity that is our superpower. And within that, though, there is another important truth for all of us to take heed of, because we operate under a whole range of Indigenous principles like kaitiakitanga, manakitanga. Many of us would have heard of those, but there is an overarching tikanga matua, a parent principle, and that is whakapapa, relationships. And it's the honouring of relationships, the respect of the mana held by the marae, the people of that marae, respect for the mātauranga that they hold, respect for their roles and the strengths and the abilities that these people, that these communities bring to the struggle, that we have managed to forge our pathway and get these kinds of successful results. And too often I've seen that even with the best of intentions and the greatest of resourcing, climate responses that have not attended to the core issue of relationships have been doomed to fall over. So what's it going to take to grow those relationships? Just wrapping this up, it's going to take some humility from industry. It's going to take humility from the NGO sector, and certainly some humility from the Crown. It's going to require all of us to learn about our own roles, our own heritage in this space, our own inheritance in this space, our histories, the histories of our relationships as well, in order to mend it again. And how did it become so broken? And it's going to require us to understand the pitfalls of saviorism and privilege. And so that's integral before you intend to access mātauranga that will be pivotal. And it is important that the mātauranga plays a pivotal role, but the relationship has to be secure there for that trust to happen. And it's vital. If we don't want to respond to a problem of extracting from the earth by extracting from Indigenous minds. So it's urgent that Indigenous knowledge is front-footed and central to this. And there's also with that an immediate need and a call to action for all of us to build relationships of integrity with our own histories and with grassroots communities around their experiences, their responses and their strengths. It's probably the most overdue and underappreciated task in climate justice and in the climate change movement. So let's get cracking. Kia kaha tātou katoa, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora Tina, ngā mihi nui, this absolutely what we needed. And I just want to say on behalf of everybody, just how much we feel for you, that you're sitting there in a hotel with your house under threat. I did not know that. Oh my goodness. Look, we'll, off channel, if there's anything else that anyone here can do, I'm sure that the whole network would love to know if there's anything that we can do, but we just so appreciate it. Look, I'm going to go into the chat, and Tane, are you there? Tane, back when James was talking, spoke about acknowledging the grief that our Pacifica brothers and sisters have, and that, the indigeneity of understanding what it's like to be when your island may not be there anymore is, again, people at the real cutting edge of what really taking on this grief could mean. But Tana, you had a question. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Kia ora, thank you. Tina, I was just wondering if you could kōrero at all on Mātaki Mai as well, and how that might come into kind of future governance or structures that'll kind of move us past the kind of current impasse, the Crown and such.
Tēnā koe tāne. Yeah, Mātaki Mai is, again, it's one of those really urgent pieces of work that is going to provide for us such an important model for how we move forward. And again, we can't, one thing I guess I want to say is that in order for us to, Indigenous peoples are constantly putting out fires of injustice all around us. The fact that we are constantly engaged in putting out these fires of injustice inhibits our ability to be able to operate at our fullest potential in the climate response and resilience space. And those fires of injustice generally come back to the fact that we are living under imposed colonial authority that does not recognize the incredibly inspirational relationship potential within te tiriti justice. And so Mātaki Mai is a model for tiriti justice, an overarching model for tiriti justice in Aotearoa, which is really what is pivotal for us to be able to achieve climate justice. There won't be climate justice in Aotearoa without treaty justice, without tiriti justice, I should say. And so if we keep on overlooking that, we're buying into the same kind of mindset that feeds colonial entitlement to the environment as well. That is the type of, I want to say courage, but it's difficult to call it courage when really it's relinquishing your self-interest and your addiction to power. It's hard to call that courageous. It's human. It's what you need. It's the kind of thing that we need to do. And so, you can't have Indigenous liberation existing at the same time as colonial authority and position of colonial authority and oppression. And so climate justice in an Aotearoa space demands constitutional reform and a tiriti-centred constitution that honours the home that was created for non-Māori by te tiriti, and that honours the pre-existing rights and that are held by tangata whenua also on this whenua. So yeah, that is, I mean, I would recommend if there's one thing for everybody in this call who's interested in looking at what climate justice must look like in Aotearoa, it's that you have to understand Matike Mai, the constitutional reform document.
Thank you so much for that great question. And so Tina, I want to go into that a bit further, because often, you know, I know in some of the work that I do, it ends up sort of between saying, oh, the treaty's all about the Crown, and so then the kind of community sector is sort of here, you know, we're all very well intentioned, but how do we show solidarity? I think you said a great word, which is to be humble or have some humility. So in the context, you know, because you can talk straight to us, that's why you're here. What are some of the practical, you know, like say, for example, even when it comes to submitting on the, if we want to do such a thing, on the climate action plan or the emissions reduction plan that comes out, or anything else, you know, what actually do we do to be humble? And I know it's even a dumb question because that's our job to figure it out, but, you know, make it concrete for some people. So we're not, you know, do we just pull out and let the stuff go on and it's about the Crown and a new constitution, or, you know?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. Thanks, Liana. And, you know, one of the things that I always find very interesting is that when we talk about humility in this space, there seems to be like one of two options. One is we lead or we pull out. There's in the middle of that, there's the process of decentralizing yourself. And so decentralizing yourself does not mean pull out. We definitely all need to be in there, because otherwise what you wind up with is just the whole burden winds up resting with Indigenous peoples. And we can't have that either. That would be unfair either. But there is a process of decentralizing yourself. Now, what does that look like in practice? That might mean that as a part of your submission, you actually go out and learn, well, what are the local hapu also submitting on this issue? And if they are submitting, what are their concerns and how can I support their concerns in my submission? So that you're not just centering your submission upon your own interests. Do you actually even know who the local hapu are? Some of us might know who the local iwi are. Do you know who the local hapu are? Because Te Tiriti was signed by hapu, not by iwi. Iwi are very new. And so, gosh, I sound so anti-iwi, and that's so not the case, but what I am is very pro-hapu as well. And so engaging with hapu is I just see so much more mobility in this space. We're able to be a lot more mobile. And so, yeah, just things like that, like understanding who are the local hapu around you, what are their concerns, how are they experiencing these issues of waste, how are they experiencing these issues of climate. Everybody needs to learn about Te Tiriti, particularly Tangata Tiriti, because it is a Tangata Tiriti document. It's a beautiful document that created a home for non-Māori here. That is the source of non-Māori rights. And so if you are here and you are not Māori, then, you know, there's your Pledge of Allegiance. No, don't be like that. Don't go. That's a little bit cultish, the Pledge of Allegiance practice. But anyway, I'm just saying it's an amazing, beautiful document that everybody needs to engage with, because that is the source of your presence and your rights here in Aotearoa. And so understanding what Te Tiriti means in your specific space, what does kawanatanga, what does the kawanatanga article mean? What does rangatiratanga mean in the context of waste and supply chains and trade agreements and the energy sector? Because there's very distinct ways that you can understand and interpret it for different contexts. And so, you know, I think, and for the NGO sector as well, there's different ways. All of us can learn to contextualize our work in the space of Te Tiriti.
Ah, brilliant. I like that word of decentralize yourself. But, you know, as you already said, it's actually about being human, isn't it? It's like coming back to understanding that we all live in relationship with each other and we are all nature. We are all descended from nature. And like you say, if if one of the things that we could do as a network is develop our relationship in place with the hapu and with the marae and be listening, not telling, that would be a great start.
It would, and sorry, Liana, I just want to say, you know, again, to come back to Te Tiriti, that is the parental relationship document for this whole nation. That is what created our relationships. That's what created Aotearoa as a nation state. I'm going to say, I like to use Aotearoa as the, I don't use it. Aotearoa as our nation state. That's what created this beautiful relationship of Māori and non-Māori to be here. And it's also, you know, it's the ignoring of Te Tiriti that has created a lot of the issues why we can't potentiate our Indigenous knowledge in those spaces, or the struggles to potentiate our Indigenous knowledge and solutions. So yeah, again, we have to come back to Te Tiriti and Matike Mai as the healing space for the Tiriti breaches. Yeah, and that's what will form the basis of our relationship movement going ahead.
And you'll see, thank you very much, everyone. In the chat, there are a couple of links now so that we can all make sure that we've read that and upskill ourselves. And I guess that's it, isn't it? You could say that if here we are on the cusp of thinking about how we as a networks can do more collective action on climate change, that we might have to spend a bit of time, you know, understanding what a cubic meter of carbon is, or, you know, better understand, I don't know, the energy ratings of things. But in actual fact, what you're telling us is that maybe one of the muscles that we need to learn to exercise the most is some basic kind of cultural capability in terms of knowing our own tiriti, and some relationship building humility characteristics, and that might be just as strategically important for us as knowing all the tiki stuff.
Not maybe and not might. Other than that, yes. As I said, it's the most overlooked factor. And you have a look, you know, 30 years after we started to try and drop emissions, we're creating more emissions than ever when we're operating. So what's fallen over? What's not happening there? The thing that is consistently overlooked, that has been recommended over the last 30 years repeatedly, is to create these relationships and honor those relationships and honor the voices of these frontline coalface communities. And we're seeing the results of that in the lack of progress for emissions reductions. So we can't continue to overlook it. It's for me even more urgent than the techie stuff, because the techie stuff, we can get a grip on that. We know how to do it. We've been doing it. But the thing we always overlook, largely because of self-interest, I have to say, is the relationship building issue. It's self-interest and the yuckiness and discomfort of those types of spaces. That's the muck work we got to do.
Yeah. And if what you're doing isn't working, you've got to do something else. So great. So look, folks, I just would like to turn over to our slides. We're just going to, hopefully, Tina, you're staying right till the end of the session, so we haven't heard everything from you, but we've got our first little job to do together as a raupu. So daughter, can you share the slides on the screen? Yeah. So look, overall, everybody, hopefully you've picked up that the focus for today, for all of our 3 networks coming together, and for the first time in 2 years, I must say, thanks to you-know-who, the old Rona, we haven't actually got to be together as 3 networks. And so it's so exciting today to be able to do that. And you will also see, though, that we weren't just going to make it as being about a nice little chance to catch up, although, of course, that will be very, very welcome, is that the executive officers of each of the networks have been conspiring. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is an online conspiracy. They've been conspiring behind the scenes, and they want to lay down a widow to all of you. A challenge that if ever there was going to be a time for our 3 networks to organise a piss up in a brewery, then this is it, to take collective action on climate change. Now, of course, we're a network and you're the boss. The executive officers are very capable of being the bosses, but we know they're not the boss. The networks are the boss. But really the challenge is here. And so these are the 4 sessions today and the very sort of overall outline theme of each session. So we're in session 1 here, and it's about getting some crucial climate context. hearing from our leaders, our thought leaders on this, and starting to think, okay, what might be some of those kaupapa tikanga that if we're going to go into this that are absolutely crucial before we have this conversation. The next session that comes up at 10, there's about a 15-minute break between these sessions, is to hear a bit more about the challenge and to have a good old debate with some new people that you might not have met yet on whether we should accept it or not. The third session, again, is very interactive. It's about generating ideas for action and getting together with some other people across the networks to see what they might look like. We're not making decisions, but we're trying to get a feel for what actions we possibly could do. And then in session 4, it's all open to see what emerges from this discussion. You know, we've got the opportunity here today to go, are we going to take up this challenge or not? Do we need to talk about it some more? What could it look like? All of that will come. So hopefully you've seen on your bookings that these sessions are there. Double check the timings, that you've got them right, because we had to change a couple of them at some point. But all of this will go into the chat and all of it will be in the session briefs. Sing out if you haven't got any of that information on the chat, and some of the lovely team will help you. And just to acknowledge the team here, I don't know whether I'll probably forget somebody, but behind the scenes, we've got Daughter. Wave to everybody, Daughter from Zero Waste Network. I don't know whether we can see you because we're viewing your screen. We've got Georgina from IHA. Wave to everybody. We've got Gareth from Community Energy Network. Oh, we can't see you right now. Thanks, Janet. I'll just say the names and they'll pop up later. We've got Izzy, we've got Jen, we've got Ali, and maybe I've even forgotten somebody else, all on rapidly behind the scenes working things out. So the other thing that's going to be going on is that throughout this session, if you're not so familiar with Zoom, although goodness knows we're probably all way too familiar, is that you might know that in Zoom, quite often if you go down into at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a 3-dot thing that says more, or there'll be a little emoji that says reactions. If you go into that reactions, there's an icon that puts your hand up, and then that shows up on your photo. And so the team here can see if you want to ask a question live, that your hand is up. And the chat also is available. And then last but not least, we've got some Trello boards that are going. Again, the links for those should have been sent around, and hopefully someone will put the links for those in the chat now. So if we could just turn the slides off for a minute so that we can have a go at just seeing what's going on with all the people and all the chats. Thank you. So, Ali, are you there? Show your face. Can we take Ali off mute and see if we can see her?
Here.
Hello.
Hello.
So folks, you'll just see that we've got in the chat there a link to a Trello board. All that really is like an online place where we're going to start taking notes, and where you can also, once we're going to open up the challenge statement that's been sent out to everybody, and that will be open throughout today and then all in the following weeks. So we're hoping that you don't have to do it in there, but if you want to go in there and see what others are saying, or you want to go and sign on and work in there, that's where one way that we're taking submissions on the statement. But also, of course, put things in the chat, send things in an email to your coordinator. One way or another will gather them up. But Trello is just a nice way of making that more public and available to everybody. It's definitely like a place where we're having a debate. You can say no, you can say you don't like it, but just keep it nice and kind to each other. We don't have to all agree. It's actually fine if we've got different perspectives at this stage. That's the point of this day, is to start to give us a chance to socialize some of our thinking. So those are some of the places that we've got. And if you haven't read it already, you don't need to know it right now, but the next session, it will be really great if you'd had a look at that challenge statement. And so the link there has turned up in the chat as well. So that's all the kind of behind the scenes stuff. As I say, put things in the chat, put your hand up using the icon, and one way or another, someone will find that you're sitting there. And apologies, it's all my fault. Whatever goes wrong, it's all my fault. Have I missed anything? I think that's most of it on the logistics. So let's get back into the substance of things. And I think we'll need that slide back now, daughter. Here's the question that I'm about to ask you. And we're going to have, everybody can either put their hand up or put things in the chat about this one. So we've got this challenge. We're starting now to think about if and how, and according to what tikanga or principles or values, should we start as 3 networks considering to do collective action? So here's the question I'm going to put to us. Think about what Tina and James have said, and think about what's significant for us. So us, the 3 networks. And I understand that there are many people on this call that may be a friend of the network, don't even know which ones we're talking about. Zero Waste Network, Community Energy Network, and Environment Hubs Aotearoa. We can put some links in there if you don't know all 3 of the networks and you only know one, so you can find out more about us. But if you're not an official member of any of these networks, that's cool. In fact, we're really interested in your opinion about what you think we could achieve as well from the outside. So everyone, just be aware that there'll be a whole mixture in your groups and calls and things of some people who know know each other very well, and others who might be new. And so if we can just be friendly to those. So Tina and James have given us their own wero, and we've laid down some challenges for us. I'd love to hear now, out of what you've heard from both those speakers, what you think is really the most significant for us when we're considering what kind of collective action we can do across those 3 networks. And this is collective action. We know taking fair point about just transition, perhaps having one connotation. So when we say just transition here, we mean equitable, and we might want to add some other things in. So that is the question. We want to make a list of some of the things that we think are super significant that you've heard Tina and James say that we don't want to forget. So just going back to the chat now, I think someone said the link didn't work. So Betsy, that was you. Can't seem to access these when the URL is inserted in the browser. So someone might be able to help you out there directly on our team, Betsy, on the technical team. Thank you very much, daughter. All right, so what have Tina and James said? Of course, I've kept a little list because I'm a girly swap, but I'm keeping those in reserve. I see a couple of hands are going up. So here's some message coming through. Hey, Jennifer, thank you for your comment. Would you like to come online and just say it to people?
Sure. So
introduce yourself, Jennifer. Say where you're from.
So my name's Jennifer Nicol. I'm a councillor for Waikato Regional Council, and I lead the Climate Action Committee. So it's really cool to see this hui coming together and participating in it, having that chance. So what I took from James's koro particularly is, and what I see in central government a lot, is that there's a lack of imagination out there of what's possible, especially because a lot of people who are in power are around policy especially, are used to how the world has always worked their entire lives. And so I think the people in these networks are just full of imagination and creativity and willingness to give things a go. So even if it's the smallest project, do it, share it.
Thank you. Brilliant, Jennifer. That's a really great, succinct point, and totally, I'm sure many people on this call will relate to it. Okay, just bear with me while I get all my view options sorted out. Any other calls? Put them in the chat, folks. Oh, okay, I'm going to go for one that I heard.
So Scott has got his hand up.
Okay, we'll come to you, Scott. I'm going to go for one that I heard, which is, let's come back to the relationships. Exactly. Thank you. Lane, is that how you pronounce your name? Lane, do you want to just talk to your comment that you've put in there?
Yeah, kia ora everyone. Lane Phillips. I've recently returned to Sustainable Taranaki, where I've worked in the past. Amazing to be here with this group this morning. I could probably speak for an hour on relationships. I don't know if anyone's read the book Patterns of Meaning by Jeremy Lent, but it explores our process of development of thought, reason, logic, scientific revolution, and basically alongside that development of how we are and who we are, particularly in the West, the process of disconnection from nature, the process of othering of nature, and coming to the place of it's an extractive resource that we can dominate and use for ourselves. And for me, I think I really agree with what I've heard this week from different people about whakapapa, about relationships, about our deep connection to the land, and through that the natural looking after, sorry, my words aren't coming out well, the natural looking after that comes out of that space. So I'm really interested in connections with ourselves, with land, with others, and how that shifts how we live, and therefore our impacts on the world.
Hey, thank you, Lane. And I see Gareth has been on the case and put the link to Jeremy Lent in the comments there. So fantastic. Whakapapa is being like one of the key messages and the key principles for what we would need to I just want to put it in there, like, because Tina said it, like, don't we need to have te tiriti in there, like us really beginning to understand what that means in this context, and to be, not that you ever get to the end answer, but that we need to be actively putting our consideration of where that sits with all of this in right up there at the top. Am I being mad? Does anyone want to? Good question, Fee. How many people have done a workshop on the treaty, or how could we perhaps even be able to help crowdsource and really reinforce that for all of our networks? Yeah. Okay, Scott, what's your idea, mate? Tell us.
Okay. Hey, thanks, and really stimulating. So I've been thinking the last couple of weeks that, all of this potential we have in the networks and outside of the networks is something that it's underutilized. And one of the ideas that I've had in my mind is, the need for a super network. Perhaps we could step up to take advantage of our huge potential. But really what I'm thinking of now, having listened to so many people and understanding the urgency for action, is that we need something a little bit more dynamic. We need to model dynamic adaptive pathway planning, and possibly this is the step up that we can do with our networks to develop some sort of action group to take advantage or to express our collective mahi and reach out to hapu and iwi and incorporate that in an advocacy for central government to speak regularly and often and purposefully to central government about this amazing sector, whether it's hapu, whether it's place-based community groups, whether it's our networks, and what we can achieve when we are resourced and respected as a partner in the transition for climate justice.
Yeah, you muted there, Leanna.
Thanks, Gareth, for saving me. What I'm hearing you say there, Scott, is that we should be getting in the position, much more actively organising to be in the position of almost being like a backup crew for hapu and iwi's own, voice, that we should be understanding what that voice is and using some of our privilege and connections to be able to more comprehensively get behind that.
Can I interject a little bit?
Absolutely, you go for it, Tina. I was about to come to you anyway.
Yeah, I've seen, so there are a lot of things that need to be understood in order for you to be functional. Nobody wants to be harmful in that space, but there are a lot of things that need to be done in order for us to be able to operate in that space in a way that is functional and not harmful, particularly when it comes to decentering yourself, and also understanding what it is to not try and co-opt the Indigenous voice. What sometimes it starts off as an intention to amplify can tip over into co-opting, and what starts as an intention to build a network can tip over into a neo-empire. And so the difference in those things is when you have done the deep work on understanding how colonialism and imperialism features within your context. And I'll give you an example of that. There are I can't even enumerate, millions and billions of dollars tied up in philanthropic funds that are actually rooted in a history of Indigenous dispossession of lands, the channeling of Indigenous resources out of their lands to central spaces. There are even, there are philanthropic funds in Aotearoa that operate off drilled, dispossessed Indigenous land right now. And less than 1% of global philanthropic funds go to Indigenous communities. And those stories are deeply connected to each other, where the funds for those philanthropic societies have a history derived out of Indigenous dispossession, but less than 1%, something like 0.2% tops goes back to Indigenous communities out of those philanthropic funds, all of them intending to do amazing, wonderful work. Yes. None of them have done deep investigation into how their very existence is also rooted in that same story. And so, yes, amplification is required, and we all need to be doing this work, but we also need to understand how that features in our own context in order to avoid replicating the problem unintentionally.
Yes, and totally tautoko that, and just note that some people have put in the chat that I know that the Treaty Collective in Wellington are doing some good work on taking on some of that responsibility for doing that work that you talk about. So let's make sure that's on our list, and that we need to do that deep work. We need to check that there's not some things that are going on in our own unconscious bias that we would inadvertently, or maybe just out of our own laziness, perpetuate. So do the work is what I hear you say there, Tina. So just to look in the chat to note that if those of you that do have access to the Trello, that we've been keeping some notes. And now we're going to try, and this is just not really, I wouldn't say it's fun, but this is just warming us up for some of the work that we might want to do later on in this. So what we've basically been doing is making a list of the key points that have come out, and you're about to get a chance in a poll to tick the ones that you think you've really heard and that you agree with. So I'm just going to add a little bit more to the list. If Ali is also working hard on keeping this list, I wanted to come back to that funding angle of it too. We put that question to James around needing to be some funding to help innovative and activation at the grassroots community level. And I'm hearing from that too, that there should be, of course, there always should be, is way more support for, with no strings attached pretty well, for innovative and activating work done at a hapu and whānau marae level. So we've got those on the list. We also did some questions around being able to, just as our first speaker said, around show those examples of what we're doing that's really good, but get them to the decision makers, get them in the system, flawed though it may be. And the other thing that Tina said was around relationships and decentralizing. I think we've got those down there under the whakapapa point. And the decentralizing point, I think, can go in with the do the work, stop and really understand what Tiriti and our sometimes unconscious biases are really locking in before we proceed. So I don't know whether at the moment, Ali, you can be clever enough to share your screen to show us what's on it. Daughter's just making the suggestion that we could do the poll at the start of the next session. Yes, we can do that, but I'd love to end this session just being able to see what we've got on that list at the moment, so that when we come to the next session, we're all ready to roll. Can you do that, Ali? And we'll probably shut the slide down now, daughter.
Yes, so many notes on here that I've been trying to capture. This is some of the comments we were just making, and there are some links and resources in here and some abbreviations from the Q&A as well. Was there anything specific you wanted me to touch on, Liana?
No, I just want to make sure that people can see that you're what a great, fantastic job that you're doing, and we're doing our best to lose nothing.
It's under the Trello, and then you've got to click under 9 AM, and we'll be taking notes for the rest of the day under the agenda.
Excellent. And
Thank you.
anything else in the comments? So what we're going to do, folks, now is because we've come to the end of our time and we want to make sure that you get a cup of tea, is that we're going to go. Thank you very much for this.
Kia ora, Leanna, can I just have a quick kōrero just to add something? Sorry, I've had my hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that there, Valerie.
Right. Kia ora, I'm Valerie from the Zero Waste Network. I just really wanted to tautoko both Fee and Tina's comments that they have made throughout this about the kind of work that Pākehā need to do. But I also really want to reinforce the issue about money and resources. You know, that I've been really impressed with the Zero Waste Network. I work for the Zero Waste Network, and about how we value people's time. And I think it's really important that we understand that when we ask Māori to do something, when we ask them to get involved in our projects and care about the things that we care about, that we figure out ways to actually value the work that they are doing, and not expect them to do that resource from their own pockets. And also that when we're doing funding applications and asking for money, we might think about checking in with hapu and iwi organizations about the kinds of funding aspirations that they have, so that we aren't competing with them, and that we're collaborating and finding ways to meet their aspirations as well. Kia ora.
Okay, thank you, Kia ora, Valerie. So I just want to come back to Tina and see if there's anything you want to say to close, Tina. Thank you so much for your time. We all just benefited hugely from having your fantastic friendly face there, and also your insightful and just, you know, keeping it real comments. We know that you do this work all around the world, and we're so lucky to have you give up your time, particularly under the circumstances. So Tina, do you want to say anything?
No, look, just tautoko the really important point that Val just made. That is really what makes the difference between being extractive. If you don't want to be extractive, then don't expect free labor from Indigenous peoples in relation to this, and figure us into your funding applications, but also don't compete with us also on the submission front. And that's really, it's important that you understand what the issues are for local hapu when you do submissions, as well as funding applications as well. So thanks, Sis Val, lovely to see you again, and lovely to see all of you. Kia kaha tātou katoa. We're getting into some of the great grunt work that's required of us. Tēnā koutou.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll leave this thing now. Come back, same bat time, same bat channel. Our next session is due to start in very little time. We'll hope to see you all here back at 10 o'clock.